Hello. I'm very glad to be here today to talk about an interesting and difficult topic: how to resolve destructive conflicts. You know, you would have thought that by now we humans would have learned how to live together more peacefully and more happily. Would have learned how to listen to each other and think about each other's needs, and in particular, avoid hurting and killing each other. But unfortunately, it hasn't worked out quite that way. At the present time, for example, globally speaking, there are more people in motion, there are more people homeless, there are more people migrating because of civil violence than at any time since World War II. And those problems don't stop at the borders of the United States. Not only do we have some violence here too, but according to the Pew Foundation, groups in America are more divided amongst themselves, are more alienated and embittered towards each other than at any time since the Pew people started making their polls. So much so that, in fact, there are people who are worrying about the possibility of mass violence in our country as well. So it's time to think seriously about what causes conflicts to be destructive and intractable, and what we can do about it. The easiest way, I think, to begin thinking about this is to put yourself in the place of a party to an intense, violent or potentially violent conflict, and think about what they're thinking. What are they thinking? Well, one thing they think is, there's us and there's them. We don't want to fight. We don't like to fight. We're peace-loving people. Unfortunately, though, we have to fight. We're forced to fight because of the aggressive actions, the malicious intentions of them, of the other people. So we start with a contrast which says they choose to fight, and they force us to fight. But it's worse than that, because they not only choose to fight, they like it. The contrast goes on to juxtapose we, who are not only peace-loving but kind, to them who enjoy the suffering of other people. They're cruel. They don't have the same kind of respect for human life that we do. And so if we get into a fight, we're always trying to minimize collateral damage, to keep civilians safe. They don't care if they keep civilians safer, they just as soon hurt civilians. So you may say at a certain point, well, maybe we ought to talk to them. Maybe we could help settle our differences by speaking with them, by negotiating. But no, then we get a third characteristic of the enemy, which says not only are they malicious, not only are they cruel, but they're also not trustworthy. They're deceivers. They're liars. And you don't negotiate with a liar and a deceiver unless you want to end up like the British at Munich, trying to negotiate with Hitler in the 30s and being taken advantage of. So you can't negotiate with them because they're deceivers and they'll take advantage of you. Finally, there's another reason why you can't negotiate with them, because they have ulterior motives. When they fight, they have a platform, they have a program which they're hiding. And the program is they are interested in total control. They're interested in world domination. They want to be God. Whereas we fight for the reasons that we have announced. We say what we mean, and we mean what we say. They don't. They're secretly harboring notions of conquering the world. And therefore, not only can't you negotiate with them, but you've got to destroy them. Unconditional surrender is the logical result of this. Now, when you put all of those images together of the enemy, and you have the cruel and malicious and lying and deceitful and wanting to be God enemies, you have a familiar image, right? It's our old friend Satan, the father of lies, the one who wants to be God, the one who is malicious by nature, who does evil because he is evil. And that image, which is deeply ingrained in our culture and in many other cultures, means that when we're in a conflict that's intractable, that's not being resolved, that's getting worse, there's a tendency literally to demonize the enemy, to satanize the enemy. And this is a recipe for destruction. It's a recipe for destruction of everybody. So what can be done about it? Well, there's an antidote to this kind of thinking. This kind of thinking is what I call in a book I've just written, partisan moralism. It's partisan because it just takes our side, and it's moralism because it turns differences of opinion into differences between good and evil. The antidote to partisan moralism is system thinking. What we're discovering in the conflict resolution field is that we can get much further thinking about conflict and acting to resolve conflict if we think about conflicts as being the products of systems, and not just systems that are broken, but systems that are actually designed to produce violent conflict. Which means, of course, that if you want to resolve the conflict, you have to think about how the system operates and how it needs to be changed. I'll give you a couple of examples of this. One, I guess the clearest example, is the prison. A prison is a machine for violence. It doesn't produce violence by accident. It produces violence because it is designed to prevent the satisfaction of the basic needs of the people inside the prison, and because it monopolizes all power in the hands of a small elite. Anytime you have a system in which a few people control property, prestige, and power, and everybody else is left scrambling for the crumbs from the table, you have a violent conflict in the making. In the prison, you have this to the nth degree. And so the result is you have this horrific violence in prisons. You have prisoner-on-prisoner violence. You have prisoners versus guards and guards versus prisoners. You have everybody against the prison administration. You have prison riots. You have gang control of lots of prisons, including those in the United States. You say, well, what can we do about that? Well, we could try to reform the prisons, but as soon as you try to, for example, teach guards to think differently about prisoners or prisoners think differently about guards, then you find that you discover something about a violent system. And that is that the system isn't freestanding, it isn't isolated, it's nested. The prison system is nested in a criminal justice or crime and punishment system, which includes not only prisons, but all sorts of other institutions and armed and police and judges and a prison industrial complex and so forth. And to make things more complicated, if you try to reform that system, you discover that that system is also nested. It's nested in an economic system, a socioeconomic system, which regularly produces extreme poverty, transgenerational poverty, precarity, people who are one disease or one layoff away from poverty, and as a result of the extreme poverty, is creating communities in which families are shattered, in which the schools don't work, in which there are no jobs, there's nothing much to do anyway. And of course, we've had commission after commission and study after study that says that there is a very close link between this kind of poverty and crime. So now we see that if we want to do something about the prison, we need to do something about the criminal justice system, but if we want to do something about that, we need to do something about the economic system that produces poverty as a regular product of its operations. And at that point, things get particularly tricky because we run into a taboo. We're talking about the C word here, the capitalist system in its current state as operating in the United States. And I'm suggesting that if we want to end poverty and with it end the mass incarceration of millions of our fellow citizens, we're going to have to think about reconstructing, revising, perhaps in some major ways, the way the capitalist system operates. I'm not here to say how I think we should do that. I am here to say we need to start talking about it, even though it's been made taboo in many ways to talk about it. How can we talk about reconstructing systems that generate violence? How can we talk about system transformation? That is the major question. And it seems to me that there are several possibilities here, and I don't have time to talk about all of them. I'll talk about a couple of them. One possibility is this. When you see that a system is generating conflict and generating violent conflict, one thing you want to do is to help other people and help yourself stop personalizing that conflict and start focusing on the system. For example, when we talk about American politics today, I am not a great fan of our current president, Donald Trump. But I find myself pleading again and again with other opponents of the president to stop personalizing the conflict with him and the political conflicts in the United States. Stop talking about Trump as some kind of mental defective or a Russian stooge or a would-be dictator, and start talking about the problems which, unsolved, generated his election. Problems that have to do with things like deindustrialization, wage stagnation, social insecurity, family problems, loneliness in the United States, and a host of other things that we can talk about and should talk about because they're common problems. We have them all. If we can only stop calling each other names long enough to sit down with each other and talk about them. Second thing that we need to talk about is the way to get folks who disagree intensely with one another about many issues to sit down together and dialogue about what the system is that's causing the problem and what can be done about it. That's a possible conversation. I've helped facilitate conversations like this myself between groups that really don't like each other at all. And it's something which I think we have to do now on a much larger scale. One of the things we're discovering about that, by the way, is that a very good venue for doing this sort of things is religious organizations, churches and synagogues and mosques and other religious sites, because people will sometimes come to the church and be willing to talk with each other and talk with people in other churches in ways that are more difficult just in the purely secular world. But however it's done, these kinds of dialogues need to happen. And fortunately, we have institutions like my own school, the School for Conflict Analysis and Resolution, that have people that can help facilitate those dialogues. It's hard, again, because when we have dialogues about a system which has been made sacrosanct, we need to break taboos. And we need to help each other get to the point where we can do away with the taboos long enough to talk sensibly about what needs to be done to fix systems that are producing violence. Finally, if we're talking about system change, system transformation, we're going to inevitably be talking about politics. But the problem is that systems come with handy-dandy methods of fixing them. They all claim to be self-correcting. And there are certain methods that are prescribed that are offered to people who are interested in making change. But those methods very often are designed to keep the system going in the same way that it's been going forever, not to change it in any serious way, which is why, for example, in the United States, we had to have a Great Depression in the 30s before we could talk about making the kinds of reforms that the New Deal made in American society. So the third thing that's needed then is to encourage ourselves and encourage other people to participate in new politics, in forms of politics that are radical because they're looking at what's wrong with systems and how to change systems, but also nonviolent, so that we're not faced with this choice of reform or revolution, which sometimes leads to worse problems than the problems that we started with. One way that we can have this kind of conversation, by the way, and one way that we can have this kind of new politics is to get together and to focus on problems which many of us would agree exist. The fact that the United States, for example, United States of America has been at war continuously for the past 15 years, longest period we've ever been continuously at war. The fact that we are still operating around the world as a kind of empire with troops in more than 100 countries, and with a military-industrial complex which swallows up a lot of the surplus in our own country, the economic surplus which might otherwise be used to solve social problems. That sort of problem is something that people on the left and on the right can sometimes agree on, and at least agree enough on to talk about. So that the empire is another system which generates violence. It's another system that needs to be changed. And with a little luck and a little determination and a lot of goodwill, we can stop calling each other names, stop playing the partisan moralist game, sit down together, and try to move towards what we most need in our own country and in the world at large, which is system transformation. Thanks for listening. I hope we can get together and talk again one day soon.